And now for something completely different, the Kit Car Show at Exeter, where so many cars look familiar but aren't, except perhaps under the skin. It was a cold weekend for an outdoor show, but since the largest percentage of the cars which were driven to it were open-topped anyway, you can be sure that the owners weren't troubled by a little thing like sub-zero temperatures. Nope, it was just the spectators who froze.
The world of great geeks.
No, it's not the spirit of ecstasy, and no, this isn't a Rolls-Royce. But it is one of the success stories of the British motor industry, even if you haven't seen it on TV or read about it in the paper. This is the Beaufort, and it's a kit car that's unsurprisingly based on Ford mechanicals, although its name is that of its original creator rather than an acronym. The first car was built in 1985 around an old Cortina, but if you look under the hood of this one, you'll find a straight-six Nissan engine. Variation is very much the name of the game in this highly specialised market segment, and though over 1,000 Beauforts have been sold, it's unlikely that any two of them will be the same. Kit builders famously discard kit components they either don't like or disapprove of, and in recognition of this fact, most kits are configured to offer the builder as much choice as possible in selecting donor parts. But even a successful maker like Beaufort is only selling about 35 cars a year, guaranteeing buyers a degree of exclusivity Rolls-Royce owners must envy. Yes, you're right, it's a Lotus, it's a 340R, and no, it's not a kit car. But with a limited production run of 340 units, it will be built in smaller quantities than many other cars in the show this weekend. And if you go right back to the beginning, Colin Chapman and Lotus started this whole ball rolling, delivering cars in pieces to avoid purchase tax. And even if you only had to drop in the engine and bolt the wheels to a Europa, it still counted as a kit car to the taxman. And so it should. Getting that engine in place was no easy task. The 340R comes in one piece, is basically a lightweight version of the Elise, and has won so much praise and admiration that adding more now would be overkill. Fun on four wheels, a driving purity that's seldom matched, you name it, this has got it by the bucketful. Rather like its illustrious forebear, the role model not just for the Elise and 340, but for a wide range of lookalikes and copycats, all of which have their pluses, minuses, admirers and detractors. But none of them have managed to capture the perfect looks of the original. I just know we're in trouble now with the owners and builders of all the different variants that have set out to recapture the cheerful appeal and raw excitement of Colin Chapman's original 7. It had nothing on it that a race car didn't need. In fact, it was a race car design adapted for the road, especially not a heater or weather gear. And driving it properly meant doing without the clip-on door, resulting in a condition fondly known to owners as Lotus elbow. And it too was delivered in kit form, saving tax for the buyers and saving Lotus from the need to create a production line for the little car that did more for the company reputation than the Elite or the Elan. When Lotus ceased production, its most consistent dealer took over the tooling, and the Caterham 7 is still in production now, 45 years later. And so are a variety of similar products. Dutton and Westfield led the way, but now there are other choices too, and all offer the same thing: the chance to build a car just the way you want it, and then to experience the kind of performance and road holding previously only available to racing drivers. And to share in their discomfort too. No doors or windows, no heater, and not much actual seating to speak of either. Unlike the Porsche replica, which at least has real seats. When GP concessionaires, who were a successful maker of beach buggies at the time, unveiled an Oban Speedster lookalike, we all smiled. Then came the Spider replica. Not a lookalike, but a replica. A faithful, millimetre-perfect copy of the original, except that it was made as a glass fibre moulding and based, like all proper beach buggies of the time, on an old Volkswagen Beetle. We confess to bias at once, it's just so pretty. It was so close to the original and so well made that Porsche permitted GP to put the badge on the front, which is some kind of accolade, especially when car companies protect their trademarks so aggressively, and especially from replica builders. In fact, this industry is a study in trademark legislation and lawsuits, and arguments over who owns the copyright in a design, a name or a badge have touched on almost all of the main characters, including the Seven and perhaps most famously, the legendary Cobra. Like the Seven, the Cobra was flattered by imitators, and an interesting position arose. It was a design long since outdated and long since out of production, but as soon as the replica makers started to produce glass fibre lookalikes in successful quantities, the lawyers were fully briefed by just about anyone with a reasonable claim to the copyright. Whereas the Seven case protected name and appearance, the Cobra battle was all about names, and there is still only one legitimate claim to the AC Cobra name. But half a dozen or more companies offer the chance for you to build a replica of one of the world's most famous sports cars for half the cost of a family saloon. Plus a family saloon as a donor, of course, with most having settled on the Sierra as the car which has to make the supreme sacrifice, especially since the range includes a 150 horsepower V6 that fits the bill and the hole under the Cobra bonnet. But there's a Rover or a Chevy V8 option as well, an ironic twist that ought to make Ford purists seethe, since both engines come straight from the General's parts bin. Three-wheelers formed a huge percentage of the cars on show in Exeter, which might seem a little strange, but the British fascination for three-wheelers was fired up by Morgan and has never completely died away, thanks mostly to the small costs compared to a four-wheel ownership. John Ziemba made a few more than 300 machines like this one before ceasing production, although it is apparently now back in business after a fairly long break. With more than a hint of the original Morgan in its looks, the three-wheeler can come with a variety of engine choices, and they range from the more practical and effective modern units like the Honda 500, which has gained a new life and an extra wheel here, to something that looks a bit more like it was built in the 30s. Despite transatlantic origins, Harley-Davidson motors really do look and sound the part, but they can double the cost. Otherwise, you're looking at just about the cheapest motoring on the planet when you take to three wheels and the open road. One of the most successful of the kit car makers was, and is, Lomax, with four- and three-wheeler versions of a two-seater based on the most unlikely of donors for a car with sporting pretensions, the Citroën 2CV. The idea is simple enough: off with the original body, on with the new. If you want a three-wheeler, Lomax can offer a single modified Citroën trailing arm, and if you really want to get to grips with the project, you can use the Lomax chassis as well. It looks the part, and it certainly costs the part as well, because this is all very affordable stuff, and it has all the pleasure of open-top motoring as well. So no wonder that it's been commercially available for almost 20 years. And some have been around 10 years longer. In fact, Richard Oakes and Nova pretty much started the trend for putting posh new bodies onto second-hand Beetle floor pans when the Nova made its debut in 1970. It wasn't cheap, but it was breathtakingly pretty, and thanks to previous experience with glass fibre moulds, Oakes knew how to produce a quality product, and the Nova was exactly that. The mouldings were sharp and strong, the finish perfect, and there were even a few surprises, like the pretty and effective clamshell door openings, which have stood the test of time far more effectively than you might suspect. Like the whole car, in fact. It's probably no longer fair to quote Motor Magazine's query, "Is this the most beautiful car in the world?" it asked 30 years ago. But even though it is very definitely 70s still, it's also still a looker. A bit too much of one, according to its designer, who later said that he'd spent too much time and effort on the wow factor and not enough on the driver comforts, despite the trick door mechanisms. But considering his background, it's maybe no surprise to find that his concessions to interior comfort were a little bit rudimentary. Because Richard Oakes was there in the beginning, and by that we mean he started here, with the beach buggy phenomenon of the 70s. Not these actual ones, mind, but with the Tramp, which was a plastic body that fitted on top of a VW floor pan, yes. This one here, and you might find yourself accidentally mumbling lines from the current advertising campaign at any moment now, is actually a Skoda. How times have changed. In fact, it sometimes hurts to think of the words of one designer who was on the brink of kit car success and luckily just happened to have a split-window Beetle which served as an admirable donor. Shame on you, sir. A split-window Beetle is a classic and ought to be preserved, not cut up and turned into something like this. You've heard all the arguments before, I know, but the fact is that we've come a long way since 1971, and the industry we all thought of as a passing fad then is not only still with us, but is actually thriving. It's a mobile expression of the British obsessions with do-it-yourself on the one hand and daring to be different on the other. It's all about admirable amateurs and muddling through, and I know that everybody will take offence if they're involved. But of course now it's regulated and controlled like we couldn't have possibly imagined at the beginning. It's stabilised, it's settled, and it offers real and practical alternatives to mass production motoring. And there's a mass of them too, so many that we have another full complement still to look at on 4 wheels and 3, and not all of them Beetle based. Not every donor car is a Beetle. We've seen Sierras, but what about the humble Mini or even the not so humble MR2? Fancy a cheap Ferrari? Follow me. Even the buggy, classic resting place for the mortal remains of the Beetle, has moved on since the heady days of the 70s when people were trying to recreate California on beaches all over Europe. There were beach buggies, sand buggies or dune buggies and just plain buggies. Not all of them relied on lurid paintwork and a casually placed surfboard for their success, and neither did they need non-stop sunshine April through October as per California law. Lucky, because large swathes of northern Europe are noticeably light of endless sunshine, but that doesn't mean the death knell for buggies, and a whole range of leisure activities have sprung up around it, activities you can enjoy in almost any weather, even rain. Dune buggies, just plain off-road vehicles with a simple cage and a reasonably common and readily available engine, offer plenty of entertainment and of course provide the kit builder with a fairly simple and straightforward project. In fact, what a great way to start building your own cars. Relatively straightforward, reasonably cheap and loads of fun when it's finished. And even if it never gets the single vehicle approval every home build needs, you can still take it to the woods and have fun. Which is, of course, what the original owners of these used to do. Conceived as a show car for Turin in 1970, Bertone's elegant coupe was spotted by Lancia's flamboyant rally chief Cesare Fiorio, a man of whom most kit builders will almost certainly approve, not least because he disdained the 1600cc Lancia power plant with which the show car came equipped, and asked Bertone to build him a running prototype with Ferrari's V6 Dino engine. We're talking legend now, because the Stratos won the World Rally Championship 3 years in a row and gave birth to the less pretty but even faster 037. But only 400 of these were ever built for homologation purposes, and were it not for the growth of the kit car industry, this devastatingly pretty shape would have been lost forever. And this might well have become a mini Marcos, but for the informal way that the designers and designs tend to migrate from one place to another. Certainly, Nova designer Richard Oakes began work on a project for Marcos and ended it by creating the Midas, as kit makers discovered the Mini's engineering, with engine and running gear all carried on handy bolt-on subframes, which made it an ideal donor for kit projects. Soon after its launch, the Midas became a separate entity to Marcos, and it continued to develop, with Oakes giving it new looks and still cleverer features. But then came disaster and a fire at the factory, and as the Midas company closed what was left of its doors, the original rights to the design reverted to Marcos, while the Midas company was bought by someone else entirely. They went bust and were taken over by GTM, who developed the Midas Gold based on the Metro, but sold the Mini-based Midas Bronze to someone else. All clear so far? Me either. The bottom line is that these are well-engineered and nicely designed cars that form the basis of an excellent kit, with no shortage of donor cars and parts. So if your spanner hand is twitching about now, this may be a good place to start. It may be a funky street cred name, but starting life as a car maker under the umbrella of bad design has all the hallmarks of disaster, even if it is all in capital letters. Which may be a shame, because everything else about this Ferrari 355 lookalike seems to be pretty much as it should be. Based on the MR2, which is a pretty little sports car in its own right, the Ferrari clone isn't. Crammed onto the MR2 wheelbase, the body shape looks a lot better on screen than it does when you stand next to it. The fact that its proportions are all wrong probably won't bother the girl you're trying to impress. The fact that it's lost the elegant sweeps of the original, graceful shape will escape the attention of most people in the pub car park, especially when you can find all the badge work necessary to make it seem authentic, finding the small decorations for every spot on the body where they belong. Now, you might think that's taking it to extremes, especially when the interior is determinedly Japanese and not Italian, when everything inside the car says MR2 and not F355. But if you're not going to pay as much attention to detail as possible, what's the point of doing it in the first place? All of which raises another issue, because most of the people here are here because they're extremists of one kind or another, because they pay attention to detail. All else aside, the regulations surrounding self-build mean that the cars have to submit to a scrutiny that's a million times more intense than any conventional annual test. To be road legal without the enormous cost of the various type approval legislations which major manufacturers need for every model, you have to gain single vehicle approval, in which your car gets an engineering check. And in general, most people who build cars have a degree of competence, or they wouldn't begin the project, and most SVA failures aren't concerned with big faults, but are concerned with details, the little things. And speaking of little things, what about this? There may be a small amount of tongue in our cheek at this point, but we have to say that this was our favourite exhibit at the Kit Car Show. Some of us, well, okay, me really, let's be honest, I've always had a sneaking fondness for the little three-wheelers we used to call bubble cars. The Messerschmitt versions are cult items these days, but I always like the chubby little face of the Isetta, and not only is it good to see it make a return, it's even better to see it back as an ecologically sound electric vehicle. Plug it in at night, drive it to work or the station car park next day. Shame there isn't enough room for the family shopping, but really, who cares? Same here, really. We had a quick look at the Grinnell Scorpion this time last year, and here it is again, looking just as classy. It's another interpretation of the three-wheeler scheme, in which the absence of a fourth wheel makes it easier to build it yourself, reduces your budget and reduces the licensing requirements, and therefore the age restriction on driving. And in this market, of course, looks are at least half the battle. If the car doesn't look the part, it will never sell, no matter how slick the handling or raucous the power. The Grinnell looks the part though, and it does the business. A turbocharged 220 horsepower means hang on to your hat all the way to 60 miles an hour in less than 4 seconds, and you can keep a firm grip all the way to 150 miles an hour, always assuming you've got the bottle for it, and the Autobahn of course. Now from across the car park this looked as if it might be the real thing, even though we knew it couldn't be. But what a tribute to its designers and engineers, and no wonder really, because Suffolk's SS100 replica is so faithful to the original that many parts are actually interchangeable between the two. And a lot more are interchangeable with an XJ6, so start there as a donor car and get yourself a nice 4.2 straight 6 with all the running gear you'll ever need. The rest of the kit, not cheap by the relative standards of the marketplace, is as close to perfection as you could want. Instruments, leather seats, hood, you name it. This is all authentic stuff. In the case of the seats, designed and built around a frame that's identical to the 1938 original, it's all a little too authentic for those of us who are used to grippy modern buckets. And you will notice that because you will be driving the Suffolk replica in the way it was designed to be driven, letting the tail slide gently away in the bends, holding the angle with the throttle rather than that authentic spoked steering wheel, watching the big silver dials as you steer with your right foot and the seat of your pants, which is now slipping around just a little bit too much for comfort. And here's a variation on the very same theme. In fact, Royale have offered several variations over the years, but this one quite clearly owes its appearance and style to the Type 57 oblique Talbot Largo. But with a name like Royale, we should be looking Bugatti-wards for inspiration, even if the underpinnings have rather more prosaic origins. In fact, you can pick Granada or Sierra, as those underpinnings, and the only real difference between the two will be the cost of that donor and the nature of the available engines, which can include Sierra's smallest inline 4s and Granada's big V6. But back to three wheels and back to our roots really. This is the Blackjack or the Avion, or both, depending on which point of the lifespan curve you entered. But it's Richard Oakes again, it's 2CV again, and it started life as a cheerful evocation of Morgan nostalgia, and that's just what it is. Together with the Scorpion, it's probably the most admired three-wheel package on the market, and remember, it was designed by the maestro for the DIY builder. Carcraft Cyclone was designed, as the name suggests, with performance in mind. Following the success of the Fiat-based Zero, yes, really, Fiat-based, came the Cosworth version, which led to the Vauxhall-based Cyclone. Mid-mounted in a space frame chassis and a neat-looking two-seat sports body, you might find either the fairly gutsy 2-litre Cavalier SRI unit, or perhaps later versions, like the 16-valve Screamer, first fitted to the Astra range a little more than 10 years ago. Both are plentiful and cheap and seriously quick, especially in this lightweight body. But if you do like it, don't go rushing in. Cyclone production should have given way to a new model just about now. Incredibly, as the spectators stream away from West Point in the growing dusk, we still haven't covered everything at the Kit Car Show. Yes, there was more, much more, and yes, we'll be going back there for another look at something that's fun for some, hobby for others, and industry to a few.